Let me know if you've tried Dutch. What do you think to the Dutch style? Are you excited as I am? The first rule
is you do not talk about Fight Club.
You know, it's a serious video when I've got notes. So welcome to this video. This is the first in a series about my attempt to create a very formal Dutch aquascape. I've actually avoided this video for a long time because the Dutch style is, like I say, very formal, very rules driven, and I tend to prefer the natural style coined by Takashi Amano, and the vast majority of my aquascapes tend to follow those aquascaping principles about using elements of nature from outside, wood, rocks, plants, mosses, etc., bring them into the aquascape and make an almost landscape scene underwater. The Dutch style is very different. It actually relies on formal groups of plants, a little bit like Victorian gardens in England. Very, very formal, like flower beds, neatly divided. Each species has its own dedicated area. I forgot to mention very little or no hardscape in Dutch aquascapes. This doesn't kind of please me as aesthetically, I guess, as the nature style. But because I'm always interested in improving my aquascaping skills, my plant growing skills, and actually recently I've learnt that if you tend to want to avoid something, you should actually approach it and grow from that experience. So actually a little bit nervous about this series of videos because it's almost uncharted territory for me. And many of you may have tried Dutch aquascaping, but there's very few really gone very detailed on following the rules. A few exceptions, Vin Cutty, who's kindly allowed me to use his material for this video series. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, there's a very little representation in terms of the balance of nature aquarium style versus Dutch. It is very much in the favour of nature aquarium style. So my purpose or my motivation isn't necessarily to convert you to Dutch style, it's to hopefully educate you and also educate myself along the way. There will be mistakes, there will be learnings, there will be algae, and I want to take you through the whole process, and then hopefully in, say, 6 months' time, after a series of videos, not sure how many we'll do, but hopefully by the end we'll have a successful, whatever that means, Dutch aquascape, and then maybe I'll even enter it into the Aquatic Gardeners Association International Aquascaping Contest in their dedicated Dutch category. So I just wanted to go through a little bit of history actually. The Dutch style was actually originally kind of conceived in the 1930s by the NBAT, that's N-B-A-T, that stands for the Nederlandse Bond Aqua Terra. Like I said, they were formed, I think, in 1930, and it was at a time where hobbyists were starting to grow aquarium plants successfully and actually having their aquariums more dedicated to plants and plant growing. And so the NBAT actually came up with a very firm set of rules and guidelines in order to almost compete. In essence, they do have a competition where the judges will actually visit the homes of the hobbyists, and there's a very, very long and comprehensive list of rules that should be followed. And the large emphasis of the NBAT is focused on it does terrariums as well as aquariums, it does biotopes, it does nature aquarium style now as well, it does community tanks, but the main kind of focus and what it's well known for is this Dutch aquascaping category. And I just think it's really interesting, and it's just very, very different to the nature aquarium style. Are you okay, Betty? So I will be setting up the Dutchscape in here. I will take you through the whole process, how I'm planning it, what plants I'm using, why I'm using those plants, where I'm going to put those plants, and then we'll go through the whole process of growing the plants, maintaining them, and then maybe even photographing, videoing, etc. Just a very comprehensive series of videos to hopefully educate and inspire you all about the Dutch aquascaping hobby, if you like. I want to shout out also to Lennart, who has helped motivate me by giving me access, a special access to the NBAT archive, so I can see the previous winners of the Dutch categories. I'll overlay some of those images now. And it isn't actually my first ever attempt at Dutch aquascaping. I did do a feature for practical fish keeping probably about 10 years ago. But when I look at the aquascape now and I'll overlay that, it is not really in keeping with the Dutch rules. So speaking of which, I have printed out all of the rules. I have printed out the English translation of the NBAT, and I will leave links to these in the description, which is a good 20 or 30 pages long. But I also have printed out Vin Cutty's, he's a US hobbyist. He has done a very good guide on Dutch aquascaping. He's actually called it Some Rules for Dutch Style Aquascaping, a quick guide for beginners. He says a quick guide, but it's still many pages long and it is actually very detailed. So yes, I've been reading these over and over and trying to assimilate all the information. I do have to print things out for some reason. I can't really learn things off a screen as well as printing it out, so that's interesting. So yeah, Vin Cutty's guide is 26 pages long. You can download the PDF yourself, of course, and I will leave a link to that, as I said. And thanks to Vin for allowing me to use his material. What I did do, actually, because it is so long and comprehensive, and we haven't got time to go through every single bit of detail in this video, I did a summary of basically 10 kind of rules to follow to create a successful Dutch aquascape. Now, the first thing I want to point out is this aquarium is typically too small. Ideally, you want a minimum of 80 centimetres or 30 inches in length in order to have enough plant species to create an effective layout. I could have done it in my Highline 400, of course, but I love this aquascape and there's no plans to dismantle that anytime soon. I could have got a bigger aquarium, but I already have 4 at home and energy costs. So I thought I'll just try my hand in the 60 centimetre. This is the Noah's Escaper line 60. Holds about 20 gallons, 75 litres, 60 centimetres long, 35 front to back and 35 high. So it is a little bit too small, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think it's okay to start. So that's what we've got so far. We'll talk about the equipment in a little bit, but I'll go through the 10 rules now. So the first rule is limit plant species, and it says here aim for no more than 3 species per 12 inches of tank length. So this is 24 inches, 60 centimetres. So according to the rules, it should only have 6 species. So that's the rule. So we'll go for 6 species. This prevents the scape from appearing too busy or cluttered. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, have a strong contrast between groups. Ensure a dramatic contrast between the plant groups in terms of colour, leaf shape, size and height. So basically you don't want to be putting species of plants that look too similar to each other. They should be contrasting. So definitely don't put 2 red species together. Don't put 2 light green with round leaves together. So think about your leaf shape, needle leaf or a round leaf or vertical like a grass or a lily, a sort of horizontal round. There's lots of different textures, shapes. There's obviously different colours all the way from like a very pale green all the way through to a deep red or a brown. So think about that. Ensure a clear separation between the groups. So each group of plant needs to have a clear separation, so you'll actually probably see visible substrate in between each group. So it says leave visible space about 1 to 2 centimetres. So I'll limit that to 1 because we're going to be running out of space already due to the size of the aquarium. So leave visible space 1 to 2 centimetres between different plant groups to enhance the contrast and avoid crowding. Third rule, height variation. Arrange plants of varying heights to create visual depth with short plants in the foreground, medium in the midground and tall plants in the background. I mean, that makes common sense, doesn't it? You don't want to be putting really tall plants at the front because you're not going to be able to see the back. Leaf size and shape variation. Use plants with a variety of leaf sizes and shapes to prevent monotony and enhance contrast. There's a definite theme of contrast here, isn't there? Avoid symmetrical layouts which can make the scape appear unnatural. Use the rule of thirds for focal points. So if you had a bright red plant, you'd probably want to put it 1/3 to the left or 1/3 to the right, and probably in the midground. And then you'd have contrasting plants in front and behind that, so they'd probably be green, I would suggest. Focal points. Select 1 or 2 visually striking plants to serve as focal points. Position using the rule of thirds. We talked about that already. Foreground diversity. Avoid using a single plant species for the entire foreground. Mix different species to create variety. Okay, good point. You don't want just a solid kind of mat of hairgrass, for instance, at the front. Avoid overuse of red plants. Limit red or orange plants to focal points or accent areas. Too many red plants can overwhelm the visual balance. That makes sense. Very tempting, especially as a beginner. You know, red plants are very attractive. They're quite novel, and you might want to put loads of red plants in your tank because it's like high impact. You want to kind of limit that. You know, less is more sometimes. And then finally, back wall visibility. Leave small patches of the back wall visible between plant groups to increase the perception of depth. That makes sense. Don't basically fill the whole background with plants. Have some empty areas so you can see the back. And then because of the nature of this lighting, it will look quite effective, I think. So that's the 10 kind of basic rules. And then other kind of guidelines are, they really like using streets. So you could have a foreground plant, for instance, actually running, growing taller up towards the background, and you trim it appropriately, and this creates, again, a perception of depth. So something like Staragini would be really good for that. You can form really great bushes, and it's actually very easy to kind of tame and create these streets. So Staragini is one of the first species that I had in mind when I was thinking about creating a Dutch aquascape. So streets are really important. We could probably maybe even go for 2 kind of streets, and I'm thinking they would maybe meet, and then their meeting point could be the focal point. So perhaps we have a street coming up here and then a street coming up here, and then where they intersect, you know, the payoff is the red focal point plant. I think that would look quite effective. So that's the kind of basic rules. There are other suggestions around water chemistries, circulation levels, but I am going to optimize for the best plant health possible. So I am strongly considering using rainwater. We do have a lot of rain here in England, and I can collect the rain and then mix that with my tap water, which is very hard. It's about 300 parts per million TDS, totally dissolved solid. So by diluting it with rainwater, we can drop that down to about 150, which is probably going to give us better plant optimized growth, really. There's more access. The plants have more CO2 availability, and I believe more nutrient availability, especially micronutrients. So if we did want to grow more delicate species, especially some stem plants that prefer softer water, more acidic water, then this is going to play to our advantage. It's also interesting just to experiment with different plants, different water. I will be more than likely using exclusively tropical aquarium plants, maybe 1 or 2 species which they don't do. I might want to use, considering the Cryptocorini flamingo, which is a pink plant, but that's going to be a focal point plant. Do we want more than 1 focal point in here? Interesting. So I still have to choose the plant species. There's only going to be 6 species in here. It's going to be a really exciting project. I hope you enjoy it with me. Also, a shout out to my friend Miles, my teacher friend. He's the one that really gave me some motivation to really giving it a go. He came to one of my aquascaping workshops at home, and his passion and his knowledge for the Dutch aquascaping topic really inspired me, and I thought I've got a spare aquarium. Let's give it a go. So here we are. Just talk about the equipment very briefly. At the moment I have a Weo Slim 60 LED. These aren't any longer in production. This will be replaced with a Twinstar 600S Type 4, which is their latest version, which is going to be plenty strong enough to grow the most demanding of plants. CO2 injection will be added via my 6 kilogram pressurized system with a strideways regulator. That's modular, so it's actually controlling all 3 of my aquascapes, so 3 including this one. I will be aiming for around 30 parts per million CO2, so I probably will use a drop checker to start with, just to get that lime green colour to optimise our CO2 levels. Filtration will be a mature Oase Biomaster 350, which is currently running in conjunction with another Biomaster on my 60 centimetre, my Scapoline 60, which is a kind of generic nature aquarium. We talked about the aquarium already, but the Scapolines are worth talking about. They are a beautifully made aquarium, minimum silicone work, mitre corners, low iron glass, very, very transparent. You know, you're really going to see those plants beautifully. It's obviously rimless, so you can see into the tank. A lot of the traditional Dutch aquascapers actually have their aquariums built into their furniture or into their wall, into their living space. So it's a very two-dimensional kind of experience, if you like, in terms of the actual aquarium. So, you know, it's literally flush with the furniture. And then they create the third dimension with depth, as we talked about, using the streets, using different textures and colours and contrast, etc. So that's interesting. This is very kind of unorthodox for a Dutch aquascape. The size is very small, it's rimless, so not typical, but it's what we've got to use at the moment. So filtration we talked about. I will use the standard media, and I always do with the Biomasters. They are releasing a brand new Biomaster soon called the Biomaster 2, and excitingly they are bringing out some different filter medias, so you can customise your Biomaster filtration, the internal filtration and the pre-filters accordingly, so look out for that in the future. I will be running it around 23-24 degrees Celsius, which is probably around optimum for most plant species. Liquid fertilisers, I will use probably Oase Scapoline range, which is the daily fertiliser and also the mineral mix, so it's a 2-part fertiliser. Or I'm not decided yet, I might use Tropica Specialised Nutrition. They're both great performers. I've been using both brands on all my aquariums at home and they all work very well. The substrate's interesting. The base layer is actually Molmen and a very thin layer of my previous substrate. The idea of that was hopefully it will still contain some beneficial bacteria which will help kickstart the whole kind of biological process. On top of that, I've actually got a small bag of the Tropica substrate, the plant substrate. That's not the soil, that's like it's designed to be used as a nutrient-rich base layer. And the reason for that is just another form of nutrients. It also has a very high cation exchange capacity, so it takes in any excess nutrients and locks it in. That makes those nutrients available to the plant roots. On top of the plant substrate, I've actually opened up some Tropica Nutrition capsules and sprinkled them over the substrate. So I probably used 10 or 20 capsules and then sprinkled the Osmo coat, the nutrient-rich balls all over the base. Again, that's going to add more nutrients. And then on top of that, I have added 9 litres of Oase Scaper soil, or is it the Tropica soil? I forget which one. They're both very similar. They both look the same. They both perform the same. So you can go for what you wish if you wish to choose Oase or Tropica soil. So that's the substrate, very comprehensive. Hopefully it will give the plants the best chance possible in conjunction with the liquid fertiliser. So the liquid fertiliser will feed the plant leaves, the substrate will feed the plant roots. The plants are going to have more than enough nutrients to stay healthy, good CO2, good lighting, good circulation, good biological filtration, good maintenance. So we'll be doing the regular frequent water changes, especially in the early days. Preventative maintenance is definitely better than corrective maintenance. So keep those water changes up, especially at the beginning. The next video will be choosing the species and coming up with a design. I'll even do some drawing, which I haven't done for many years, so that's exciting. So thanks for watching, appreciate it, take care. Let me know if you've tried Dutch. What do you think to the Dutch style? Are you excited as I am? Or do you think it's a bit boring, a bit too rules driven, too formal? Let me know in the comments. I do read all your comments and I do appreciate you all. Take care. Cheerio.